Oh, the sun.
Yeah, it's so annoying coming in and out.
Yes. How are we doing? Right. Do people stick normally pretty well to 15 minutes, or?
Yeah, around about that, yeah. I mean, some a little bit longer, some a bit shorter.
Yeah, interesting to see.
That was the advertised.
10 to 15 it says on there, yeah. And do many people give lots of instructions for what to do during the day?
No,
not less.
Gable's good at that, but I
Most,
don't
yeah.
know. Especially as Compline is no longer Compline.
Yes, that's
Join
true.
us for Compline.
Join us for...
Join us for a marathon. Sleepy song.
endless psalms. Good morning and welcome to Home Retreats. My name's Father Chad. Today I'd like to consider the topic of discerning the story of my life. Now, for some, story is a rather overused image, a doomed attempt to make religious teaching more palatable to today's audiences, the Christian story rather than Christian doctrine. For others, story evokes the childishness of fairy tales, of Father Christmas. That's a nice story, but for others, story is simply a form of leisure, whether that's the novel, the cinema, the TV, the internet, something that helps to entertain us by distracting, horrifying, titillating us, and escape from more mundane realities. To some, story seems just an irrelevance. Those who see life as a jungle, where there is time only for survival and dominance, and no room for story, or those who see life as a playpen, with time only for fun and excitement and no space for story. And yet, it seems to me that stories are fundamental to being human. As newspaper editors know only too well, facts tell, stories sell. We all love a good story, or as someone put it more pithily, humans are narrative junkies. At an everyday level, we tell stories to make others laugh, to get us out of trouble. We invite stories to get conversations started. How was your weekend? How was your journey? As we tell stories, we select anecdotes to project a certain public persona. As we recount events, the interpretation we give to the story reveals something of ourselves. And stories, of course, operate at a different, deeper level. From our early days, the stories we are read provide role models and ways of interpreting the people and the situations we meet. That sense of narrative sequence is reassuring, giving meaning and purpose to our life. Stories create new possibilities, allowing us to reimagine our future. Now, just as families tell stories about themselves to explain their place in the world, so societies and cultures have developed stories that could be called myths, which carry out a number of functions. They entertain, they explain, they educate, they enlighten. Operating originally as a sort of manifesto of primitive belief, they have also become a tool for, if you like, psychic integration for later generations, offering explanations that enable us to discover the inner meaning for ourselves. Now, myths, particularly creation myths, can be found in all religions, a phenomenon that kept C.S. Lewis for many years from the Christian faith, until a famous conversation with Tolkien in 1931 persuaded him that, in his words, the story of Christ is simply a true myth. A myth working on us in the same way as the others, but with this tremendous difference that it really happened. And one must be content to accept it in the same way, remembering that it is God's myth, where the others are men's myths, i.e., the pagan stories are God expressing himself through the minds of poets, using such images as he found there, while Christianity is God expressing himself through what we call real things. Christ emerged from a people whose understanding of God was not expressed in any physical image, but through the real things of human lives. It was story that bore the weight of God's revelation, not simply a revelation communicated through one person at one moment, but a revelation conveyed over time and communicated through the story of a people. Nearly 20 years ago, Christopher Booker wrote a book on the power of stories, distilling them into 7 essential plots that can be seen underlying all literature, beginning with ancient myths and continuing into modern works. Firstly, overcoming the monster, like St. George and the Dragon. Secondly, rags to riches, like Cinderella. Thirdly, the quest, like Lord of the Rings. Fourthly, voyage and return, like Alice in Wonderland. Fifthly, comedy, in the Shakespearean sense of all's well that ends well. Sixthly, tragedy, like Othello. Seventh, finally, rebirth, like Scrooge in the Christmas Carol. Now we can see some of these 7 plots in the Gospels. Jesus overcoming the monster in his battles with Satan in the wilderness. The quest taking him to Jerusalem to face his opponents. The tragedy of his passion and death. And then the springtime, the comedy of his resurrection. But the incarnation is no voyage and return, as God has now made his dwelling with us for good. There is perhaps not so much rags to riches as riches to rags in the self-emptying of Jesus. And rebirth that was not necessary for him is what he makes possible for us. That time in the wilderness enabled him to understand, to discern his mission, his story. An understanding deepened and strengthened through his times of prayer, those moments of communion with his Father before key points, such as the choosing of the 12. Finally, that understanding was purified at Gethsemane, when he prayed his way to accepting the impending story of his passion. It was a question not of writing, but of discerning the story of his life. Many today would say, I am the author of my life. The only unifying feature of my story is me. Life is not a jungle, not a playpen. It is a stage, and I write the script. Perhaps you know some a little too preoccupied with their own psychodrama, who tell you too much of their own story. My experience has been that life is more about response than control, responding to the nudges, the messages, the call that comes from God, a process I do not control. I understand my story. I do not create my story. And that involves looking both backwards and forwards. In my 20s, full of angst about the direction of my life, I tried to listen to the will of God, to hear his call. I prayed, often without any clarity, sometimes blindly, trusting that I would find the path for me. At the time, the events of my life seemed pretty random, like dots on a page. It was only later, looking back, that I could see the shape to those dots, like the shape of a graph, leading me in the direction of the monastic life. After 25 years of that monastic life, in 2017, I undertook a pilgrimage of thanksgiving from Iona to Lindisfarne. Over 300 miles, there was plenty of time for looking back, giving thanks for the different people and events of my life. But to my surprise, I also found myself looking forward to the next 25 years of monastic life. What would this second half look like? Put bluntly, how did I want to die? How would I face the good Lord? There are times when discerning the story of your life means taking stock, not so much to invent a new script, but to realize the danger of becoming trapped by one particular script. Returning to Booker's 7 essential plots. Are you trapped by tragedy, the expectation that you will always fail? Are you trapped by comedy, the need for a joy that cannot face sadness? Are you trapped by rags to riches, the preoccupation with the upward line of success and progress? Are you trapped by the quest, that restless search for the perfect job, the perfect monastery, the perfect relationship? Are you trapped by voyage and return, shuttling between the reassuring light and the exciting shadows? If you can acknowledge that danger of being trapped, you can become open to the fuller story that God offers for your life. As we sing every morning here at Matins, "Oh, that today you would listen to his voice, harden not your heart." That seems to me the central challenge of life, how to respond with an open heart. And that requires faith. The story of my life is not a problem to be solved, not a question I can master and answer from the outside. It is a mystery to be entered, a question that can only be answered if I am prepared to change. That entering into the mystery was encapsulated by St. Anselm. Credo ut intelligam. I believe in order that I may understand. In that sense, life is not a jungle, not a playpen, not a stage, but a door, a transition, an invitation to what can only be experienced by stepping through. Unless you change, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. That was the experience of all those called: Abraham, Moses, Samuel, Peter, Paul. They discovered the story of their life as they responded in faith. And this is a process that is never complete here and now. We can never reverse Anselm's saying, "I now fully understand, and so finally I can believe." It is a process that is only fulfilled when we come face to face with the author of our life story. A moment described by Basil Hume. Judgment is whispering into the ear of a merciful and compassionate God the story of my life, which I had never been able to tell.